The slap echoed through the engagement hall so hard that even the violinist stopped playing. Clara Vale's head snapped to one side, and the crystal tray in her hands crashed across the marble floor. Glass exploded at her feet. Wine ran like blood between her shoes. Around her, nobles in silver and black turned with hungry eyes, already smiling, already enjoying it. Her older sister Serafina stood in the center of the room in a pearl-white gown, one hand still lifted from the strike, her face beautiful and cruel under the chandelier light. "Look what she's done," Serafina said with a laugh sharp enough to cut skin. "Even as a servant she ruins everything." A few guests chuckled. Their father did not defend Clara. Lord Vale only grabbed her arm so hard it hurt and dragged her forward for everyone to see. "Apologize," he hissed through his teeth. "Or I swear I'll have you locked in the cellar before the king arrives." Clara tasted blood in her mouth and lowered her eyes because that was what she had learned to do. Stay quiet, stay small, survive. But tonight the room felt wrong. Too tight, too hot, too full of perfume and fear, because this was not just any party. Tonight the Vampire King was coming to collect a debt, and everyone in the 7 provinces knew blood debts were never paid cheaply. Clara knelt to gather the broken glass with shaking fingers while silk shoes circled around her like vultures. She heard them whispering the same old things. Poor Clara, plain Clara, the hidden daughter, the one the family never shows. It had always been this way. Serafina was the jewel, the daughter their father dressed in gold and taught to smile like a weapon. Clara was the mistake kept in shadows, given old gowns, old books, old silence. When they were children, their mother used to say Serafina was born to be seen and Clara was born to endure. Their mother had died years ago, but the sentence stayed. Endure. Endure the sneers. Endure the scraps. Endure watching her father pour money, praise, and future into one daughter while the other learned how to disappear so completely that people forgot she was in the room. And tonight, while servants rushed and musicians trembled and their father checked the doors for the 10th time, Clara knew exactly what was happening. Lord Vale planned to offer Serafina to the Vampire King like a jeweled sacrifice and call it survival. Then the front doors burst open. Cold wind swept through the hall and killed the candles nearest the entrance. Every voice died. Every back straightened. The guards dropped to one knee so quickly their armor clanged, and in the doorway stood the man who had turned whole bloodlines into warnings. King Alaric Thorne entered without hurry, without fear, without even the smallest sign that this room full of mortal hearts could ever threaten him. He wore black from throat to boots, no jewels except one ancient ring dark as midnight. His face was unfairly beautiful but not soft. Nothing about him was soft. His mouth looked built for promises and destruction. His eyes were pale, winter blue, and when they moved across the room people flinched as if those eyes could strip flesh from bone. Behind him came no laughing court, no parade of advisors. Only silence, only power. He stopped in the center of the hall while nobles bowed and Lord Vale nearly folded in half. "Your Majesty," their father said, voice shaking despite the smile forced onto his face, "welcome to my home. Everything is prepared." Alaric glanced around once, bored already. "Prepared for what?" he asked. His voice was low and calm, which somehow made it worse. Lord Vale gestured towards Serafina with both hands, proud and desperate at once. "For the honoring of our agreement, my daughter, my eldest, beautiful, educated, graceful, a worthy bride for a king." Serafina lowered into the curtsy she had practiced for weeks, golden hair shining, diamonds trembling at her throat. Gasps of approval moved through the room. Clara stayed near the floor, still gathering broken glass no one else would touch. She thought if she kept her head down, maybe she would survive the night unseen. Then Alaric said, "And the one kneeling in the blood." The whole room froze. Clara's fingers stopped over a shard. Lord Vale laughed too quickly. "No one important, just my younger daughter. She is clumsy, shy, and unsuited for court." Alaric did not look at Serafina. He looked only at Clara. "Stand," he said. The word was quiet. It landed like thunder. Clara rose because every instinct in her body told her refusal would be fatal. Her cheek still burned from the slap. A thin line of blood marked one finger where the glass had bitten her. She kept her eyes lowered, but she could feel his attention on her like heat. "Look at me," he said. She did. For one impossible second the room vanished. There was only his face, those strange cold eyes, and the terrifying feeling that he was not looking at her dress or her bruised cheek or her lowered station. He was looking through all of it into the place she had spent her whole life trying to hide. His gaze dropped to the blood on her hand. "Who struck you?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Lord Vale answered for her. "A family matter, your majesty, nothing worth your notice." Alaric's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to fall. "I asked her." Clara could feel every eye cutting into her now. Seraphina's rage, her father's warning, the noble's delight. This was how people died, by saying the wrong truth to the wrong monster. "My sister," Clara whispered. A dangerous smile touched Alaric's mouth. "In front of guests." Seraphina swallowed hard but still lifted her chin. "She embarrassed me." Alaric's eyes moved to her at last, and whatever Seraphina saw there made the color drain from her face. What happened next shattered the evening. Lord Vale stepped forward, sweating. "Your Majesty, please, let us not be distracted. You came for my daughter, and Seraphina is ready." Alaric turned his head slowly. "Did I say her name?" Lord Vale blinked. "We discussed." "You sent 12 letters begging for mercy," Alaric said, cutting through him like a blade. "In every one you described your beautiful daughter as if beauty could erase what your family owes mine." He took one step toward Seraphina, then stopped. "She is lovely, empty but lovely." A few nobles looked down to hide their shock. Seraphina went white with humiliation. Lord Vale made a strangled sound. Clara's heart hammered so hard it hurt. Alaric turned back to her. "This one," he said, "this is the daughter you buried in corners." Lord Vale's panic finally broke through. "No, Clara is not part of this. She has no training, no charm, no use to a king." Alaric's eyes flashed silver. "No use to you, perhaps." Then he crossed the hall, slow enough for everyone to feel it, and stopped in front of Clara until the ruined tray and broken glass and all her fear seemed childish beside him. He extended his hand. "I'll take her," he said. "The one you tried to hide." The room exploded. Seraphina's breath came out like a sob. Lord Vale lunged forward. "No," the nobles erupted in whispers. A woman near the fireplace actually dropped her fan. Clara stood frozen, staring at the pale hand waiting for hers. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. She had imagined 1,000 futures, and all of them were small: marriage to some old merchant, a quiet lifetime as unpaid family labor, a grave no one visited. But this, Vampire King choosing her in front of everyone while her beautiful sister stood discarded. It felt less like salvation and more like the floor opening beneath her feet. "Your Majesty," Lord Vale said, voice breaking now, "please reconsider. Seraphina is the daughter fit for alliance. Clara is nothing." Alaric did not even turn around. "Careful," he said softly. "You are speaking of something I have chosen." The warning in his voice hit harder than a scream. Lord Vale stopped breathing for a second. Clara looked from her father's horror to Seraphina's hatred and understood, with sick clarity, that if she took this hand, nothing in her life would ever be the same. If she refused, she would go back to being the girl who bled quietly in corners. Her fingers trembled. So did his patience not at all. "Why?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. The question shocked everyone, including her. A nobleman laughed under his breath, as if a hidden girl daring to speak to a king was a kind of entertainment. But Alaric answered her. "Because everyone in this room is looking at your face," he said. "I am looking at your spine." His eyes held hers. "And because the one they polished to perfection would break the first time the dark looked back. You would not." The words hit her harder than kindness would have. No one had ever said she was strong. No one had ever implied she was anything except lesser. She should have distrusted it. She did distrust it. But beneath the terror, something old and starving in her chest lifted its head. Hope, dangerous, humiliating hope. Behind her, Seraphina found her voice. "She is plain," she snapped, tears glittering in her eyes now. "She knows nothing. She is beneath you." Alaric finally looked at Seraphina with open disdain. "Then why are you so frightened?" The hall went silent again. Seraphina's mouth opened, then closed. Clara had never seen her sister lose a room before. It was almost as frightening as the king himself. Lord Vale tried one last time. He dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty, I beg you, take the elder girl. Clara cannot survive your world." Alaric's face went still in a way that felt deadly. "Your world has already failed to keep her safe." Then he turned back to Clara and his voice changed, softer, stranger. "I'm not ordering you." Every noble in the room looked stunned by that. A king like him asking permission from a girl like her. Impossible. "Take my hand if you want out," he said. "Stay if this house deserves you." Her throat closed. She looked around the room that had taught her what she was worth. The sister who hit her in public, the father who traded daughters like property, the nobles who smiled at her shame. She realized with a sharp, almost dizzy calm that there was nothing here to save. Maybe there never had been. Her hand rose before her mind caught up. The moment her fingers touched his, a shock ran through both of them so violently that Clara gasped. Alaric's eyes widened a fraction. His hand tightened around hers. Something passed between them, fast, fierce, ancient. Not romance. Not yet. Recognition. As if two lonely things had just found each other in the dark and neither knew what to do about it. Serafina screamed. The sound ripped through the hall like torn silk. "No, he was supposed to choose me." Clara turned in disbelief. Serafina's mask was gone now, and what stood beneath it was uglier than Clara had ever allowed herself to see. Rage, entitlement, desperation. "You think you've won?" Serafina spat at her. "He only picked you to humiliate me. You're still nothing. You'll die in his house before winter." Lord Vale grabbed Serafina's arm, hissing at her to be silent, but it was too late. Alaric took one step forward, still holding Clara's hand, and the chandeliers trembled. "You will address her properly," he said. No one moved. No one breathed. "From this moment the girl you called nothing stands under my protection. Insult her again and I will show this house what it means to mistake mercy for weakness." Serafina's lips trembled shut. Clara could feel the fear spreading through the room like smoke. It should have satisfied her. Instead, it only made her feel hollow and shaky and very, very alive. The departure happened fast, almost brutally. Alaric did not stay for dinner. He did not drink the wine or listen to excuses. He gave Lord Vale one final look that promised future reckoning if even a whisper of harm followed Clara from this house. Then servants scrambled to bring Clara's things, only to discover there were almost none. A faded shawl, 2 old books, 1 small bag. The humiliation of that was somehow worse than the slap. Serafina had trunks of gowns. Clara had a life that fit in her arms. As she reached the doorway, Lord Vale caught her wrist and pulled her close enough that no one else could hear. His breath smelled like brandy and panic. "Do not embarrass us there," he whispered. Clara stared at him, stunned by the size of the lie, us, as if there had ever been an us. As if he had not spent years making sure she knew she stood outside every circle of love in this house. For the first time in her life, she pulled her wrist free herself. "You don't get to fear my failure now," she said quietly. "You trained for it." His face changed then, not with guilt but with shock that she had finally spoken back. Clara turned and walked away before he could answer. Outside, night had swallowed the estate. A black carriage waited at the foot of the steps, its silver trim glinting under moonlight. The horses stood too still. The air around them felt unnatural, as if even sound feared this king. Alaric helped her into the carriage with infuriating gentleness. Once inside, the door shut, and the world she knew disappeared. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Clara sat stiffly across from him, hands locked around her tiny bag, heart still racing. He watched her with unreadable focus, not predatory, not kind, something more unsettling than either. "You are angry," he said at last. Clara let out a short, unbelieving laugh. "I just left my home with the most feared creature in the kingdoms after he humiliated my entire family in public. I'm trying to choose which feeling deserves first place." To her surprise, one corner of his mouth moved. "Fair." She looked at him then, really looked. He seemed impossibly calm for a man who had just detonated a noble house. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "You gave me one answer in there. I want the real one." He rested an arm along the dark leather seat. "The real one?" she nodded. "Was I chosen because you pitied me, because you wanted to punish them, because I was the easiest way to remind a room of frightened people that you can take whatever you want?" His eyes sharpened with interest, and it irritated her that she could see approval there. Good, he murmured. Keep asking dangerous questions. Answer mine first. A pause, then, your father offered me polish. I prefer steel. The carriage rolled through the dark while those words settled between them. Clara should have felt flattered. Instead, she felt exposed. You don't know me, she said. Maybe I'm not steel. Maybe I'm just what happens when no one bothers to look. That is often where steel is found, he said. Then his gaze dipped to the bruise forming on her cheek and something cold moved through his expression. Did he hit you too? Clara looked away. Silence answered for her. When she looked back, the king's face had become terrifyingly empty. No one hurts what is mine, he said. The words should have frightened her more than they did. Instead, they lit something hot and reckless inside her. Mine. No one had ever spoken of her like something worth defending. But Clara was not foolish enough to melt over one sentence from one dangerous man. I'm not yours, she said quietly. His eyes held hers in the dim carriage light. Not yet, he said. Clara's pulse jumped. She hated that he noticed. Hated more that he smiled like he understood exactly what he was doing to her nerves. To escape it, she looked out the window. The estate was gone now. Only forest remained, black and endless. If I ask where we're going, she said, will you give me a real answer or a king's answer? There is a difference. I assume a king's answer sounds better and means less. This time he actually laughed, low and brief and shockingly human. My manor sits beyond Thorn Hollow, older than most maps, older than most wars. You will be safe there. Clara turned back sharply. Safe from whom? From the people who will hear what happened tonight and decide you are a weakness they can use against me. Her breath caught. That quickly. By dawn. He said it with absolute certainty. The moment I chose you publicly, you became important. Clara gripped her bag tighter. It had been less than an hour and already her life had turned into something deadly. Then I was right, she said. This was never kindness. Alaric's face went still again. No, he said, it was not kindness. Kindness would have left you in that hall to survive however you could. This was something far more selfish. What? His gaze locked on hers. I saw something I wanted to keep. Before Clara could answer, the carriage jolted. The horses screamed. The next second the side window shattered inward, and a black arrow buried itself in the seat inches from Clara's throat. Clara cried out and threw herself down as the carriage rocked violently. Another arrow punched through the door, then another. The horses reared. Outside, something moved faster than human through the trees. Alaric was out of the carriage before she even saw him move. The door flew open, cold night crashing in, and then she heard it, screams, not of horses now, but men. Wet sounds, the ugly sound of bodies breaking. Clara crawled toward the opening before fear could stop her. In the moonlit road, she saw 3 masked attackers rush the king at once. She did not understand what she was seeing at first because no one should be able to move like that. Alaric tore through them like a storm given flesh. One man hit the ground, missing half his throat. Another never finished his swing before the king's hand closed around his neck and crushed it. The third tried to run. Alaric caught him, dragged him back, and slammed him to his knees in the mud. Who sent you? He asked, voice so calm it was worse than a roar. The man spat blood and laughed. The girl dies first. Alaric's eyes flashed silver-white in the dark. Wrong answer. A snap. Silence. Clara could not breathe. The king turned toward the carriage, coat blacker than the night now, and for one heartbeat she saw exactly what the world feared. Not a beautiful ruler, not a dark prince from songs, a predator old enough to forget mercy. He came to her side at once. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though her whole body shook with it. He looked at the arrow still buried beside her, and something violent passed behind his eyes. Good. That was all he said. Good. But in that one word she heard the edge of something enormous. He reached in and lifted her out as if she weighed nothing. Clara's fingers caught his sleeve. They came for me? His jaw flexed. They came because I chose you. Her mind reeled. You said by dawn. I was optimistic. He carried her to the side of the road where the moonlight cut through the trees. The dead men lay twisted behind him. Clara stared at them and then at him, realizing with a sick twist of awe that he had not only saved her, he had expected this, expected danger to follow her the moment she stepped into his shadow. Take me back, she said suddenly. He looked down at her. No, you don't understand. If I stay with you, more people will come. Yes. Then take me back. His expression hardened. Also no. Why? The question came out sharper than she meant. He stared at her for a long second, then said, because now they know your face. If I leave you, they will not stop. They will just be less direct about how they use you. Clara went cold. He shifted his grip slightly, still steady, still impossible. You are in this now, Clara. She hated that he was right, hated more that some reckless part of her did not want to go back anyway, not to that house, not to that father. Not to being invisible in rooms full of people who enjoyed her pain. Alaric looked toward the dark road ahead. We move faster now, he said, and when we reach my manor, no one enters without my permission. Clara swallowed and forced her voice steady. You sound very sure of yourself. He looked at her with that dangerous almost smile. I have survived 1,000 years by making sure my enemies regret enthusiasm. He set her inside the repaired carriage with one final glance at the corpses cooling on the road. Then he climbed in across from her again as if the attack had been a minor inconvenience instead of proof that her old life was gone forever. The horses moved. The forest swallowed the bodies. Clara sat wrapped in fear and shock and a terrible new awareness. The king had chosen her. The world had seen it. Blood had already been spilled over it. She touched the bruise on her cheek, then the place on her hand where his skin had met hers, and understood that tonight had not been rescue. It had been ignition. Whatever waited ahead was bigger than a marriage bargain, bigger than her father's debt, bigger even than her sister's hatred. And as the black carriage vanished into the dark, Clara finally let herself ask the one question that made her pulse pound hardest of all. What if the most dangerous thing in her new life was not the enemies hunting her, but the terrifying hope rising inside her every time the vampire king looked at her like she had been born to matter? The gates of the vampire king's manor opened before the carriage even reached them, as if the ancient iron itself recognized its master. Clara felt the air change the moment they crossed the threshold. The forest outside had been alive with wind and insects, but here everything felt older and quieter, like the land itself had learned to hold its breath. The carriage rolled across a long stone bridge over black water that reflected the moon like broken glass. At the end of it stood the manor, rising from the cliff like something grown from the rock rather than built by human hands. Tall windows glowed faintly behind iron balconies, and dark towers clawed toward the sky. Clara pressed her fingers into her bag, suddenly aware of how small she was compared to the world she had stepped into. Across from her, Alaric watched with that same unreadable focus he had worn all night. You can breathe, he said quietly. She exhaled without realizing she had been holding it. You live here, she asked, his mouth curved slightly. When I am not burning down someone else's home. The carriage stopped in a courtyard lit by torches that burned with blue flame instead of orange. The doors opened instantly, and several figures stepped forward. They moved too smoothly to be human. Clara felt their eyes on her before she even climbed out. The first was a tall woman in dark green silk with silver streaks in her hair and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She bowed her head slightly toward Alaric but looked at Clara like a puzzle she was not sure she wanted to solve. You are late, the woman said calmly. You usually only bring blood on your clothes when the night has been interesting. Alaric stepped out of the carriage and offered Clara his hand again. Tonight was educational, he replied. Margaret, this is Clara. The woman's eyebrow lifted barely a fraction. The girl from the debt. Clara felt every pair of eyes tighten on her. Alaric's voice cooled by a degree. The woman I chose. The correction landed with the weight of a warning. Margaret studied Clara again, longer this time, then gave a small nod. Very well, welcome to the manor. Clara stepped onto the stone courtyard and instantly felt the difference between her old world and this one. At her father's estate, servants had always rushed nervously around nobles like prey around predators. Here the servants moved quietly but confidently, like people who knew exactly where they stood in the order of things. A young man with silver eyes took her small bag without comment. Another opened the heavy doors to the manor. Inside, warm candlelight revealed ceilings so high Clara had to tilt her head to see the painted beams above. Old paintings lined the walls, kings, warriors, women with strange crowns, landscapes that looked centuries older than any place she knew. The air smelled of wax, old wood, and books. "This house has been standing for 800 years, Alaric said as he walked beside her. "Before that there was a fortress here. Before that only forest and wolves." Clara looked around slowly. "And now?" He glanced at her. "Now there are still wolves." Margaret led them down a wide hallway toward a staircase carved with vines and roses in the stone. Clara could feel the silent curiosity of the household following her steps. This place had clearly seen queens, nobles, warriors, perhaps even monsters, but probably never someone like her. A girl in a borrowed shawl who had arrived with nothing but a small bag and the king's attention. Halfway up the stairs, Margaret stopped at a large wooden door and opened it. The room inside was bigger than Clara's entire childhood home bedroom combined. A deep blue bed stood near a tall window overlooking the forest. A fire already burned in the hearth. Shelves held books and a small writing desk. Clara stared in disbelief. "This is mine," she asked quietly. "Unless you prefer the tower dungeon," Alaric said dryly. She turned toward him. "I didn't mean, I know." His voice softened slightly. "You are allowed to be surprised." Margaret spoke again, businesslike as ever. "Clothing will be brought shortly. You will need something suitable for court gatherings." Clara blinked. "Court?" Margaret gave a faint smile. "You did not think becoming the Vampire King's chosen woman would remain private, did you?" The words landed heavily. Clara looked at Alaric. "Your court knows. By morning they will." Clara sank slowly onto the edge of the bed. Her life had been quiet humiliation until tonight. Now she was apparently about to become a subject of political gossip across an entire supernatural kingdom. "You could have warned me," she muttered. Alaric leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "If I had, would you have come?" Clara thought about it for 2 seconds. "Probably not." "Exactly." Margaret left them alone after instructing 2 servants to bring tea and clothing. The moment the door shut, the silence in the room shifted. Clara became suddenly aware that she was alone with the man who had turned nobles pale with a single sentence. "You keep staring at me like I might explode," Alaric said. Clara sighed. "You killed 3 men an hour ago. Forgive me if I'm still adjusting." "Fair." He walked to the window and looked out over the dark forest. They were scouts. "Someone testing how serious I am about you." Clara's stomach tightened. "You keep saying that like it's obvious, but I still don't understand something." "Which part?" She stood slowly. "Why did you really choose me?" He did not answer immediately. For a moment she thought he might ignore the question entirely. Then he turned back toward her. "Because when I looked at that room tonight," he said, "everyone else was pretending. Your father pretended he loved his daughters. Your sister pretended she deserved a crown. The nobles pretended they were brave enough to stand near me. You were the only person who didn't pretend anything." Clara frowned. "I was terrified." "Exactly." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped. For the first time since the carriage ride, she realized he was not mocking her. If anything, his voice carried a strange kind of respect. "Fear keeps people honest," he continued. "Most people hide behind pride. You never had that luxury." Clara looked down at her hands. "That's not strength, that's survival." Often the same thing. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. A young servant entered carrying a tray with tea and fresh clothing. Clara noticed his hands trembled slightly when he set the tray down near Alaric. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The boy hesitated. "Visitors arrived, my lord." Alaric did not look surprised. "Already?" "Yes." The servant swallowed. "They say they must speak with you immediately." Clara felt the tension snap through the room like a pulled wire. Alaric's expression hardened instantly. "Who?" "Lady Verena and the Eastern Council envoy." Clara did not know those names, but the way Margaret's earlier warning echoed in her head told her they mattered. Alaric turned back to her. "Stay here." "Why?" "Because politics is uglier than violence." Clara lifted her chin. "You chose me in front of half the kingdom. Don't you think people will expect me to exist?" He studied her for a long moment, then sighed as if surrendering to something inevitable. "Fine, but stay behind me." Clara gave a small smile. "You're very dramatic. You have no idea." The great hall downstairs was filled with low candlelight and tense silence. 2 figures stood near the long table when Clara and Alaric entered. The first was a tall woman dressed entirely in crimson, her dark hair braided with gold chains. The second was an older vampire in gray robes who looked like he had stepped out of a history painting. Both turned the moment Alaric entered the room. Their eyes flicked immediately to Clara. The crimson woman smiled slowly. So the rumors are true. Alaric did not bother with greetings. Verena, brother, Clara blinked, brother. The woman laughed softly when she saw Clara's confusion. He didn't mention me, did he? She asked. Typical. Alaric's voice turned colder. You didn't travel 300 miles to tease my guest. Verena stepped closer, her gaze still fixed on Clara. No, she said. I came to see the girl who made my brother lose his mind. Clara stiffened, but before she could respond, the old envoy spoke. The council is concerned. Alaric looked bored already. They often are. The envoy cleared his throat. Choosing a human publicly creates complications. Alliances depend on careful balance. If rival houses believe this girl is important to you, they will attack. Clara crossed her arms. They already tried. The envoy blinked, clearly not expecting the human girl to speak. Verena's eyes sparkled with amusement. I like her, she said. Alaric shot his sister a look. Focus. The envoy continued nervously. The council believes it would be wiser to return the girl to her family before this situation escalates. Silence fell across the hall. Clara felt something cold coil in her stomach. Alaric slowly leaned forward against the table. Let me be certain I understand you, he said quietly. You rode across half the kingdom to advise me to undo my own decision. The envoy swallowed. For stability. Verena watched the scene like it was theater. Clara realized something in that moment. Everyone in this room expected the same thing her father had expected all her life, that she would be the easiest piece to move, the one sacrificed when politics became inconvenient. The familiar humiliation burned in her chest again, but this time something different rose with it. Anger. I'm not a parcel you can return, she said before anyone could stop her. Every vampire in the room turned toward her. The envoy stared like she had just grown wings. Verena's smile widened slowly. Alaric said nothing at all. Clara forced herself not to shrink. If your council is afraid of what might happen because I'm here, she continued, then maybe the problem isn't me. The envoy opened his mouth, then closed it again. Verena laughed out loud. Oh, this is excellent, she turned to her brother. You brought home a spine. Alaric finally spoke, his voice calm but deadly. The council does not decide who stays in my house. The envoy bowed his head quickly. Of course, my lord. Verena leaned closer to Clara. Be careful, she whispered with a wicked smile. Everyone who challenges him ends up either very loyal or very dead. Clara met her gaze. Which one are you? Verena's eyes flashed. Still deciding. The meeting ended shortly after, but the tension it left behind lingered in the air like smoke. As the envoy hurried away and Verena wandered off laughing, Clara turned to Alaric. You didn't warn me your family was terrifying. He shrugged slightly. I thought it would spoil the surprise. Clara shook her head, exhausted. Your world is insane. He looked at her carefully. You can still leave. Clara met his gaze. The thought crossed her mind again, returning to a small life where no one hunted her and no vampire politics tried to swallow her whole. But she also remembered the hall, the slap, the invisible corner she had lived in her entire life. No, she said finally. I'm done being the girl people hide. Something changed in Alaric's expression then. Something darker, deeper, almost proud. Good, he said quietly. But neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the balcony above the hall. And that shadow was smiling. Because the moment Clara decided to stay, the real game had finally begun. The shadow on the balcony did not move until the hall below had emptied. When the last servant disappeared and the torches burned low, the figure finally stepped forward into the candlelight. It was not Verena. It was not the council envoy. It was someone Clara had never seen. A tall vampire with pale hair tied behind his neck and eyes that gleamed with quiet satisfaction. He watched the doorway where Clara and Alaric had just disappeared. So, he murmured to himself. The king finally found something he cares about. His smile widened slowly. That will make this so much easier. Upstairs, Clara could not sleep. The room was warm, the bed soft, the fire quiet, but her mind refused to rest. In less than 24 hours, her entire life had shattered and rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. She had been slapped in front of nobles, chosen by the most feared creature in the kingdoms, attacked in the forest, and dragged into a house full of immortal politics. No part of her old life had prepared her for this. She stood by the tall window, staring out at the dark forest, when a knock sounded softly at the door. "Come in," she said. Alaric stepped inside. For once he did not look like the untouchable king everyone feared. He looked tired, not weak, never that, but the weight of centuries seemed heavier in the quiet room than it had in the throne hall. "You're awake," he said. "Hard to sleep after becoming the center of a supernatural political crisis." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You are adapting quickly." Clara crossed her arms. "I'm surviving quickly. There's a difference." He studied her for a moment, then stepped closer to the fire. "You spoke boldly tonight. You looked like you were about to throw the council envoy through a wall." "That was a possibility." Clara almost laughed, then her expression turned serious. "They're right about one thing, though." Alaric tilted his head slightly. "Which part?" "That people will come after me." Silence settled between them. Finally he said quietly, "Yes." Clara looked straight at him. "Then why bring me here?" The question hung in the air like a blade. For the first time since she had met him, Alaric did not answer immediately. Instead he walked to the window and looked out over the forest the same way he had earlier in the carriage. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something older than anger. "Because the moment I saw you," he said slowly, "I realized something very inconvenient." Clara frowned. "What?" "That I didn't want you to disappear back into that house." Her heart stumbled unexpectedly. "That's not a political reason," she said. "No." "Then it's reckless." "Yes." Clara shook her head softly. "You're the vampire king. Aren't you supposed to be smarter than that?" He looked at her again. Eyes unreadable. "I usually am." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Clara said quietly, "You could still send me away." "No. You didn't even think about it." "I thought about it," he said calmly. "And I hated the idea." Clara looked away before he could see the strange warmth that sentence sparked in her chest. But before she could respond, a scream echoed through the manor. Both of them moved at the same time. Alaric reached the hallway first, Clara right behind him. The corridor below erupted with noise, shouts, crashing glass, the unmistakable sound of violence. Margaret appeared at the end of the hall holding a sword already streaked with blood. "Attackers!" she shouted. Alaric's eyes flashed silver. Clara felt the temperature drop in the corridor. "They got inside," he said. "Someone opened the gates." For half a second the king stood completely still. Then the monster woke up. He moved down the staircase so fast Clara barely saw him go. When she reached the balcony railing seconds later, the great hall had already become a battlefield. 4 vampires were inside the manor. Not assassins, warriors. They moved with brutal speed, blades flashing, fangs bared. One servant already lay unconscious against the wall. Another attacker hurled a chair across the room just as Alaric landed in front of him. The impact sounded like thunder. The warrior swung his sword. Alaric caught the blade with one hand and snapped it in half. The hall fell silent for half a heartbeat. Then chaos exploded. Clara had never seen violence like this before. Vampires moved like living storms. One attacker lunged toward Alaric from behind, but Margaret intercepted him with a blade through the shoulder. Another vaulted over the table toward Clara's balcony. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Before she could react, the attacker was already halfway up the stairs. And smiling. "There you are," he hissed. Clara froze. The vampire moved faster than fear. but he never reached her. Alaric crossed the room in a blur and slammed the attacker into the staircase so hard the stone cracked. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the hall. "Touch her," the king said quietly, "and I erase your entire bloodline." The remaining attackers hesitated. That hesitation cost them. Within seconds, the fight was over. 3 enemies lay dead. The 4th struggled in Alaric's grip, barely conscious. Clara descended the stairs slowly, heart pounding as the king dragged the surviving attacker across the floor like a broken animal. "Who sent you?" Alaric asked calmly. The vampire laughed through blood. "You really don't know, do you?" Alaric's eyes narrowed. The attacker looked straight at Clara. "You should ask your bride," he whispered. Clara's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" she demanded. The vampire grinned. "Because the war isn't about the king." His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "It's about her." And before anyone could stop him, he bit down on something hidden between his teeth. "Poison." The attacker died with that smile still on his face. Silence fell over the ruined hall. Alaric slowly turned toward Clara. For the first time since she met him, he looked uncertain. "What did he mean?" Clara asked quietly. "I don't know." But the words sounded wrong even as he said them. Because in the doorway of the hall, Verena had returned, and she looked furious. "You idiot," she said to her brother. Alaric's eyes flashed. "Explain." Verena pointed directly at Clara. "You brought her here without realizing what she is." Clara blinked. "What I am?" Verena's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's not just human." The room went still. Alaric slowly turned toward Clara again. "What is she then?" he asked. Verena's eyes burned. "The last descendant of the bloodline that created us." Clara's breath stopped. Alaric stared at her in shock. And suddenly the attack in the forest, the assassin, the council's panic all made terrible sense. Because if Verena was right, Clara wasn't just the girl the vampire king chose. She was the only human alive with the power to destroy every vampire in existence. The silence in the hall stretched until it almost hurt. Clara finally whispered the question everyone was thinking. "Then why am I still alive?" Verena looked at her with something between pity and respect. "Because," she said quietly, "my brother fell in love with the one woman who could end his entire species." The truth hit the room like a thunderclap. Alaric didn't look away from Clara. Not even for a second. Finally he spoke. "If the world wants her dead because of what she is." His voice dropped into something terrifyingly calm. "Then the world can come try." Clara felt the weight of that promise settle around her like armor. But the real question wasn't whether the king would protect her. The real question was something far more dangerous. If loving Clara meant risking the destruction of every vampire alive, would Alaric still choose her? Or would the monster inside him eventually decide she was too dangerous to keep? So tell me honestly, if you were Clara, and you discovered the man you love might one day have to choose between you and his entire species, would you stay with him? Or would you walk away to save the world? Write your answer in the comments. And if you want more dark fantasy love stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and check out the next story on the screen, because the next vampire king might make an even more dangerous choice.